I am no longer alone at the desk as we're being joined by Mackenzie Kraemer. He does great work over at ESPN's show, The Daily Wager. On top of that, the ESPN Stats and Information Department. You're able to follow him on Twitter at MacNova. And Mackenzie, it's great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Great to be with you, too. It's great to also not have screaming Colorado Avalanche fans sitting directly behind me for the last 20 minutes.
Yep, I am sure of that as we are out here at Circa, the lovely sports book and resort out here in Vegas. And Mackenzie, first things first, before we dive into some of the NBA or the NFL draft props that you like, what you've all fired in on, just take us through how you've been gauging this year's NFL draft, because I think it's one of the easiest things to have an opinion on, but it's one of the toughest things to get right because you're going completely off of hunches. It's really hard to explain why you like bets, but at the same time, there's lots of opinions to be had on them as well. How do you just go about being able to take a look at information to place your bets for the NFL draft?
Well, I'm a big awards market bettor, and this is kind of like a different way of kind of betting on the awards market because no one really knows anything. You're kind of just guessing. So early on in the draft process, there are very few things you can actually bet on, but one thing that I like to bet on is just try to find some long shots in certain areas or try to find ways where the odds are fluctuating a lot from day to day. Like I have some Bryce Young 3-1 tickets that I took when C.J. Stroud got jammed a lot to as soon as the Panthers trade up to number 1. The Stroud got seamed up to like a minus 350 favorite right after that, which was might have been based on some information, but but that far out from the draft, it's hard to know anything for certain. And then you start hearing more and more, like, you hear Chris Mortensen, Adam Schefter, you hear other people saying how much the Panthers like Bryce Young, and then it's like, well, why aren't the odds moving? And then eventually they did, and now Young's like a minus 1,200 favorite. I think with the draft, you really just want to consume as much information as you possibly can. Listen to podcasts, hear what people who are draft analysts from all sorts of different networks say. I know that there was a great thing the other day where Adam Schefter and Dan Orlovsky were going back and forth on whether there'd be 3 or 4 quarterbacks going in the top 4, and he was heavily saying that there might only be 1 or 2 in the top 4, which was a pretty big surprise based on where the odds have been. So you kind of just take in a lot of information, try to aggregate, and make it the best guesses that you can.
And what information do you think is truly tangible and something that you should be betting on? And what do you think is just noise as well? Because there's like 100 people out there talking about the NFL draft, and there's 100 different opinions, and there are some things like you were just talking about the guys going back and forth. One person saying, there's only going to be 1 or 2 quarterbacks drafted in the top 4. Meanwhile, the next guy is going to be saying, all the top 4 picks are all going to be quarterbacks. How do you separate the noise from what you can actually deem as being good information that you want to bet on?
I mean, you never really know for sure. You kind of just... I've been betting the NFL draft for several years now. Obviously, 2020 during the pandemic year is kind of when everybody started betting the NFL draft a lot more because there were so many more markets available.
And there was just nothing else to bet on. God.
There was nothing else to bet on, and then the books got destroyed pretty much across the board, and it seems like every year new sports books kind of want to offer more props, and then they get destroyed. They start offering less, so there hasn't been nearly as much to bet on this year as there has been in the past. But you mentioned the quarterbacks. I think the quarterbacks right now are probably the most fascinating part of the draft in terms of where they're going to go. I mentioned the number 1 pick odds movement that we've seen so much. Anthony Richardson had a massive move on that a couple months ago. It seems like that was mostly smoke, but between Richardson, Young, Stroud, and Levis, it seems like all to the eye of the beholder. We saw Will Levis get steamed up to be the favorite to be the number 2 overall pick. I mean, it seems like he, Will Anderson, and Tyree Wilson, depending on what hour I look at the market, a different one's favorite. I think Anderson was last I checked, but I think that there is something to this Will Levis team in terms of him going pretty high in the draft. It seems like the Colts are interested in him. I see that the Colts are about even money Levis is about even money to go number 4 overall, which is where the Colts pick. There's steam that maybe the Texans like him, but they don't want to take him at number 2. So really, all of this kind of points back to C.J. Stroud not getting a whole lot of love. And there's not really a draft position over-under with Stroud, but I think that there's other ways you can kind of look into betting that. One that I've looked at, too, is just trying to take some long shots later in the top 10 in terms of where he's going to go. 25-1 to go number 7 where the Raiders pick. Maybe the Raiders want to take another quarterback to develop behind Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe the Raiders trade down and somebody wants to move up ahead of the Titans and other teams to move up to that spot. And that's the other thing, too, is that you might be able to find some long odds kind of projecting that there might be some trades because right now it looks like Stroud might be slipping. It's hard to figure out exactly where he's going to land when all is said and done, but he could easily be a guy that people trade up for. So I've taken him 25-1 to be number 7. I'm looking for odds for him to go number 8 to Atlanta. I think 14-1, 15-1 is the only number I've seen. I was hoping for a little bit more than that. I've also seen him about plus 340 right now to be the third quarterback off the board. I like that a lot, especially since I think Levis and Young are going to go very high. No idea right now what to think of Anthony Richardson. You told me Anthony Richardson can go 2 overall. He can go number 20 overall. I have no idea what to think of him. I like him a lot as a prospect, but my opinion doesn't matter, and that's the other thing with a lot of these award markets and draft positions is, your opinion can matter a little bit, but really what matters is the opinions of the people who are either making the picks for awards or making the picks on the NFL draft day.
Yep, and that's what's so interesting about this as well. It's not like in a baseball game, for instance, if you bet the over-under at 9, it hardly squeaks over. You're either completely right or you're completely wrong on these because it's based on pretty much one general manager / one organization and what they think of a guy. And I'm so glad that you brought up that with C.J. Stroud because I know you're taking a look at the exact number that he's going to be going. You were mentioning number 7 and number 8. Would something else that would maybe appeal is taking a look at something like the Las Vegas Raiders draft special for their first player to be drafted, a quarterback at plus 250?
It could be. I mean, that seems a little bit... You really need to follow I haven't followed the Raiders that closely enough in terms of their particular, that's the thing. If you're a fan of one of these individual teams, you probably know more than a lot of, people who are betting on these markets because you're following these things super closely. Plus 250, that's a little short for me because, like I said, I think you can get, 25-1 for Stroud to go 7. I think that's the more likely option. Plus, it also gives you the option where if somebody trades up to that pick, because that's what happens with a lot of these markets when you have long shots hitting, it's because somebody traded up to get those players.
And I do think that that's so interesting to dive into as well, as it is Mackenzie Kraemer, who does great work at ESPN, joining me right here on the Greg Peterson Experience, because I just take a look at the NFL draft, and there's so many different ways to bet essentially the same thing. It's not completely the same thing, but there's something that you have in mind, and if one bet hits, the other bet hits. How do you sort of decipher which one to be able to fire in on and try to be able to find the best of it? Because I do think that it is very difficult to find the specific bet itself, because you can sometimes be placing a bet that if you were to just look a little bit further, you could actually get a little bit more plus money for essentially betting on the same thing.
Absolutely. And one market that you could look at that is with the draft positions. Like you might see like Jackson Smith and Jigba, for example, 12.5, 13.5, depending on where you look. The Jets have the 13th pick right now. Jets probably aren't going receiver, so 13 is probably a pretty dead number. So if you can save like a dollar on juice by taking over 12.5, I know that's very juiced, but that's just one example. But that's one way you can hit that market. You kind of just want to look at each of the picks and try to figure out, all right, is this team actually going to be able to pick with this player at this pick? Because, you might see an 8.5 and a 9.5. Well, if the team picking 9 is never going to pick that player, then, take the one that gives you the better odds that way and gives you a little bit better juice. So that's one way you can do it. You can also just look at different markets and try to figure out, is this guy have a wider range of outcomes? In which case, I might try to find some long shot bets. Or is this guy just going to be a top, 3 or 4 pick, and I want to just handle it that way? So that's kind of the way I look at the NFL draft in terms of that.
And I know that you've got a little bit of a position on Tyree Wilson as well. Take me through what you're all seeing with him and why you like him at some plus money numbers.
Well, I wish there were plus money. I saw minus 150, but I like the top 5 bet on him. It seems like looks like the top 5 you're gonna have Bryce Young in there. It's probably gonna be at least one more quarterback. Levis seems like the most likely character now. But Tyree Wilson looks like he's very much in play to either go number 2 to the Texans or number 3 to the Cardinals. And I think number 5 in Seattle is a pretty nice backstop there. So minus 155, I think that there's the percentage that equates to, I think there's a better chance than not that he goes in the top 5. So I like that price on Tyree Wilson. I think it's going to get juicier as you get closer to the draft. And that's one other thing with the draft too, is when you get closer to the draft, you should be willing to lay some big prices. I think when you're, a month or 2 from the draft, you want to get some bigger long shot bets, because you don't want to have a minus 400 bet in your account for that long. You'd rather have that money to bet on other things. But if you're a day or 2 out from the draft, you might want to just bet it right there. Like another bet that I'm looking at that I'm not going to bet on now, but if that's still out there a day or 2 of the draft, is under 4.5 wide receivers in the first round. That's minus 600. But I think there's like a 95% chance of that actually happening. So to me, a bet like that actually has some value. I know people say, those type of bets don't have value. Well, actually, I think they very well could if your percentage outcome for that to happen is more than the market indicates. And I don't want to lay out my money for a full week, but if I only have to do it for a day or 2, I think minus 400 for something like that, or even minus 600 is a good play.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.